Democrats are now pushing for student loan forgiveness on a vast scale. Republicans are crying, that's not fair. And you know what? I agree. It's not fair. Not one bit. But is that the argument that Republicans should really be making? No, it's definitely not the argument to make. And in a few minutes, I'm going to tell you why. On today's edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and we're getting started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner today, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be back with you. We are starting to ramp up some more great content for you here on the program, so start paying attention again to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Definitely subscribe today if you have not done so already. Also, of course, on the Facebook page, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. Like that page, or Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality. And of course, we are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. So be sure to subscribe on whichever platform is your go-to podcast platform today. And of course, follow our friends at the Washington Examiner at WashingtonExaminer.com. So today, I want to focus in on something very important, an increasingly discussed topic in politics right now, and that is the prospect for student loan forgiveness. It's a big issue for Democrats. They have been pushing it. Now they're calling upon Joe Biden, President of the United States, to, with the stroke of a pen, forgive up to $50,000 in federal student loans for every borrower. That's a lot of money. And there's a lot of debate going on about whether or not it's a good idea. And Republicans are talking about the idea of unfairness. It is unfair for student loans to be forgiven if you have people who have already paid off their loans or made financial decisions so that they wouldn't incur significant amounts of debt. In the Washington Examiner this week, let's go to pick 3, I had a piece where I talked about this exact issue about forgiveness of student loans and whether or not fairness is the right kind of argument. And here's something pretty striking. It's clearly not the strong argument. If you go to February of 2020, College Finance released results of a survey which found something very striking. 61% of respondents said that student loan forgiveness would be fair. 31% answered unfair, and 8% were neutral. But among the 61% who responded fair, 79% of Democrats were in that group. 59% of independents were, and even 44% of Republicans. But it gets even more interesting. A poll from November of 2020, conducted by Hill Harris, found 60% of registered voters support $50,000 in student loan cancellation. Very close to that 61% measure that said it would be fair. But it gets even more interesting. The poll found that 84% of Democrats agreed with this idea, 57% of independents, and again, 44% of Republicans, the same percentage that responded to College Finance, saying that student loan forgiveness would be fair. What this suggests to me is that the fairness argument, the idea that this is unfair to forgive student loan debt, is a far cry from the most significant best argument. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't make the argument, because the fact of the matter is it isn't fair. to people who paid off significant amounts of student loan debt before and were responsible, or who maybe decided, I don't want to take out a massive amount of student loans because I don't want the financial burden. It's unfair to them, to be sure. It's also unfair because when you forgive student loan debt, you're actually predominantly benefiting higher income earners. For example, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out in an editorial this week, a University of Chicago study in December estimated that the top 10% of households by income would receive 7 times as much benefit from a $50,000 loan write-down as the bottom 10%. In other words, student loan forgiveness is actually regressive and would benefit higher income earners. So there is a legitimate case to be made from a couple of different perspectives, a couple of angles, that student loan forgiveness is unfair. But the polling data I just cited suggests that's not the right kind of argument, especially given the gravity of the situation. Make no mistake, we do have a student loan crisis in this country. In a press conference last week announcing a resolution going before Congress, calling upon President Biden to forgive unilaterally $50,000 in student loan debt per borrower of federal student loans, Senator Elizabeth Warren broke down a little bit of why this is such a serious issue for so many Americans. Let's take a listen because she's got a point here.
This is about an executive action that ultimately will boost our economy. Right now, young people with student loan debt are not forming small businesses, not just because of the pandemic. This was already a problem before the pandemic. They're not able to buy homes. They're not able often to move out of relatives' homes. So the idea behind this is to put more money into the pockets and better long-term prospects for young people who are starting their economic lives. In the long run, canceling this student loan debt will be a big positive, not only for those families, but also for our economy.
Senator Warren does have a point here. There are significant negative economic implications to a massive amount of student loan debt, and we'll get to the numbers in a moment. But we all know it's about $1.7 trillion in outstanding student loans right now. And so when she talks about home ownership rates, also small business startups, delaying marriage and families, these are real world consequences for those folks that took out student loans with the promise of getting a good job as a result. And then they end up years and years stuck with these loans and trying to pay them back. That's true. But is the proposed solution the right way to go? Well, what is their proposal at this moment? Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts explained at that press conference.
Canceling student debt by executive action is one of the most effective ways, with the stroke of a pen, that we can provide sweeping relief to millions of families, help reduce the racial wealth gap, and begin to build the groundwork for an equitable and just long-term recovery.
With the stroke of a pen, she says, as though it's just simple and easy to wipe away as much as $1.7 trillion in outstanding student loans. It's an unrealistic proposition, but even more, there are a lot of legal questions. In fact, the idea that the president or the Secretary of Education really has that unilateral authority because of a 1965 law is very dubious, and there are legal scholars that challenge this idea and whether or not President Biden could actually take such a step. But make no mistake, there is a student loan crisis in this country. But the cause of this crisis may not be what you think. Let's put up pick 7 to showcase student loan debt increases and where things have gone since 2003. Look at this steep curve, and you can notice especially that the curve gets even steeper once you hit 2010, 2011. And there's a specific reason for that we'll get to in just a moment. But make no mistake, there has been a precipitous rise in the last decade where we have seen student loan debt roughly double in just the last 10 years. Now let's go to pick 4. This is a couple of years out of date. This is from 2018, but at least gives you a little bit of an indication as to the rising cost of college. As student loan debt has shot up, college costs have gone up. Now, some people would say, okay, student loan debt is rising dramatically because the cost of college is going up. The cost of college is rising, and so more people need to take out more loans. But the economics of that don't work out so well. Let's go to pick 8. This is an interesting point of comparison. When you see $1.7 trillion in student loan debt by the end of last year, there are about 46 million, according to educationdata.org, 46 million borrowers holding that debt. But the number of borrowers has relatively flatlined in recent years. But the amount of loan debt is rising. There's an interesting phenomenon that's going on here, and I want to get to the heart of the matter, because this is a crisis caused by government. Big government policies have, in fact, driven the skyrocketing cost of college. For example, in 2007, when George W. Bush was president of the United States, Congress moved forward with an advancement of its nationalization of student loans, where they really went to bat for federalizing student loans in the sense of giving a full federal guarantee. That's when things started going awry a little bit. You can see where things were in about 2007. You can see where we're at now. Well, in 2010, that's when Barack Obama is president. In order to finance the Affordable Care Act in part, nationalize the student loan system full bore, where almost all student loans now given out are through the federal government. And certainly almost all student loans that are being held today are through the federal government because of that nationalization scheme, particularly because interest payments on student loans would go to help fund Obamacare. Isn't that interesting? But so what happened here? The federal government over the years increasingly got involved in giving out student loans. By 2010, it was nationalized, and they were the driving force behind it. What that meant is that there was more money available, more credit available to students who felt, I need to go to college because I've been told I need to go to college. Society says it. My job prospects in the future seem to depend upon whether or not I get a college degree. So I need to go to college and I'll pay what I need to pay, but it's pretty expensive. So I'm going to go get some loans because they're available, and they're increasingly available at relatively low interest rates. So you actually see a phenomenon where the federal government getting more involved in giving out student loans has resulted in many more loans being provided to students that then incentivizes colleges and universities to jack up tuition. In a recent op-ed for Newsweek that's in the current print issue, I talk about this and what exactly was going on. Many folks think that student debt is soared because tuition is steep, but it is actually the reverse. Tuition is steep because grants and loans are abundant. In 2015, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York noted exactly that, saying that higher tuition costs raise loan demand, but loan supply relaxes student funding constraints. So in other words, because student loans are easier to get and more plentiful, there's more incentive for students to take out loans. And then as a result, colleges and universities see that that money is available, and so they go ahead and they raise prices. In fact, as the Federal Reserve Bank of New York pointed out in 2015, for every dollar a college or university receives in subsidized federal loans, the report concluded tuition increases 65 cents. The outcome similar for unsubsidized loans, 30 cents, and Pell Grants, 55 cents. What you're seeing here is an incentive for more borrowing, which then incentivizes colleges and universities to raise their prices. That's abundantly clear, but there's another component to this that's important. Beginning in 1976 and culminating in 2005 because of then Senator Joe Biden, the federal government made it virtually impossible to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy. 2005. Now, one general conclusion is that this means that people who are deeply indebted have no way out to avoid default because they can't discharge in bankruptcy. That's an important piece, for sure, and a justifiable reason to restore bankruptcy protection. But it's not the only important measure. In fact, it may be secondary to one big point, which is that when you eliminate bankruptcy protection, then you reduce risk to the lender because they're not so concerned about the prospect for bankruptcy because it's virtually impossible to do that. And when there's less risk to the lender or nearly no risk to the lender, they are much more willing to provide the loans. So 2005, we virtually eliminate, the ability to discharge student loans in bankruptcy. 2007, we expand federal guarantees of student loans. 2010, Congress, under the direction of President Obama and then Vice President Joe Biden, nationalized the student loan system. And then where are we? Let's put up pic 7 one more time to give you that visual that we have seen student loan debt grow astronomically, and colleges and universities have continued to raise their prices. It is because of bad government policies over decades that students find themselves at the brink, staring down the precipice, thinking, okay, do I have to take out the student loans? Yes, I guess I do in order to afford college because they keep raising prices, so I need to take out more loans. That keeps happening, and prices keep rising. So what would happen if you forgive student loan debt, as Senators Warren and Schumer would like to do, or Congresswoman Presley? What would happen if you say, you know what, we're going to wipe away that liability altogether, or a significant amount of that liability? Then new borrowers, students that go into college, will say, I'm going to graduate and I'm not really going to make a big point of paying back my debt because I'm going to get those loans forgiven. So I might as well take out even more student loan debt. I might as well bring more student loans into my pocket to help finance college because eventually I'm going to get it reimbursed or paid off by the federal government. It is a warped incentive structure that brings us to this point where the federal government helps to entrap 18-year-old teenagers into taking out tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt, and you hope that they will graduate with a degree and then be able to get a good paying job. But that's a hope. But it's because of how the government has structured this and warped the system. So there is a crisis, it's government's fault, and forgiveness will only make it worse. But there are alternatives to student loan forgiveness that we can and should advocate. In particular, we first need to recognize that there are borrowers who are so deeply indebted they need a way out. So let's restore the ability to allow borrowers to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy. In fact, Senator Warren has for years proposed restoring bankruptcy protection, and she's right on that point. Now, we can quibble with how you go about it and some of the strategies that she wants to undertake, but the overall idea is good because, one, it gives deeply indebted borrowers a way out, but it also restores risk to the lender, yes, including the federal government. And that might help to bring things a little bit more into balance. Also, what we should do is provide more support for people who are paying off their student loans and working diligently to do so through means like enabling or empowering employers to help their workers by providing a tax-free benefit of student loan repayment support. There's legislation before Congress to do exactly that. And what that does is enable people who want to pay that back to do it more simply, more easily, with support from their employers as a benefit. So it's not just a giveaway. And by the way, one thing I should say about the bankruptcy protection provision, there's a consequence. It's not just like you're going to get it wiped away without having some consequences to bankruptcy, like, for example, your credit score being dinged. That's important because it means that people are going to make smarter decisions when deciding, A, whether to take out loans, and B, whether or not to discharge those loans in bankruptcy. And it's important that we get incentives back into balance so that people aren't making decisions that can be harmful for themselves for years to come. That's what the problem is fundamentally, is about incentives. So we do need to restore bankruptcy protection and empower borrowers through support from their employers to pay back student loans more quickly. There are a number of other things that we can do to address this crisis in higher education, particularly the cost side. We need to revamp the student loan system altogether and how those loans are done. We need to eliminate the FAFSA form, which, gosh, I could spend a long time talking about the problems of the FAFSA, but make no mistake, the FAFSA is an opportunity for colleges and universities to really bring in those students and deceive them into taking out more loans or going to the whatever they need to do for financial aid. We also need to reform the college accreditation system and so many other things. The point here is that forgiveness is not the answer. And I didn't even talk about the astronomical cost of student loan forgiveness, but about the fact that it would make the situation worse. But there are alternatives. And given the gravity of this situation, given how serious things are with this $1.7 trillion in student loan debt that just keeps rising and keeps inspiring greater and greater cost of college, given all that, we must do something. So I'm in favor of that, but Republicans certainly need to be smart about how they message against student loan forgiveness. Talk about these kinds of things and not focusing in on the idea of unfairness. We're going to talk more about this and have a discussion with John Tamny of Real Clear Markets next week, so be sure to tune in for that. That is it for us today on this special edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. My thanks to the Washington Examiner, to producer of the day, Corby Wise, and to you for sharing this video. Please go ahead and share it. Like, subscribe, all those good things to the channel. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a great day. And as always, may God bless America.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.